Hello ladies and gentlemen, MarauderEX here with a video. It's always really ominous when I start that, isn't it? But not anything ominous this time, just some discussion. I woke up this morning to an email in my inbox talking about the Atari VCS and how its Indiegogo campaign finally launched. And I'm actually really surprised by this because I kind of expected this just to turn into vaporware. I figured that this was the development cycle and the hype train that led up to this really did not go well. They were going to do the original Indiegogo campaign months ago, and then at the last second they pulled it. A lot of the lead up was talking about the real wood. There was a lot to it that just seemed off or off-putting at the very least, and I was really not expecting this. And I check on it this morning that it's actually launched, and as of right now it has over $2 million on its Indiegogo campaign. Really surprising. That's a lot of money. That is an insane amount of money for its first day. So I felt that I needed to talk about it a little bit, because there's a lot of things about it that just kind of I don't understand, I don't get, and I'm really wondering how and why. So the how and why, I don't get this. How it's got so much money, why it got so much money so quickly. I will be the first to admit I'm not a technical specialist. Like, I've looked at the tech specs that they posted on the Indiegogo release, and I don't know how to quantify it or compare it evenly to other hardware. I don't get what the closest comparison is. I've tried to find stats online of, how does this CPU compare to, other CPUs, specifically other console CPUs, either the PS4, the Xbox One, or the Switch. What about the GPU? What's that? And I haven't really been able to find a lot of concrete information. I've seen a lot of people post information back and forth, but I haven't seen anything that can show some concrete information. And I know that you're not always going to be able to get some concrete information because you could go with the theoretical max of whatever the hardware could do, but it's going to boil down to how the software is optimized for the hardware that's going to... But I know that people like to talk about the very specific facts of how powerful a console is compared to another. Because that was one of the things that I was really concerned about. I had no idea how this was going to set itself apart from the other consoles. And so far, the only thing I've seen that could set itself apart is the fact that it is digital only. There is no information on a disk drive, cartridge media, anything other than digital content download. And one of the things about that I feel is kind of getting glossed over, especially with the Switch coming out more recently, is that it only has a 32 gig, basically flash memory. The eMMC, it's not high-end memory. That's the built-in. It does support external hard drive or SD cards, but I know when the Switch came out, one of the biggest complaints is everyone was up in arms that in this day and age, your console, you deserve 500 gigs at least of internal memory, especially if it's going to be a very digital heavy console. And the Atari VCS seems to be digital only, so I'm really surprised that it starts off with so little memory and people are just glossing over that fact. And I know you can have an external hard drive, but you can have an external hard drive with a lot of consoles these days. And the SD, that's the Switch, basically. The Switch has SD memory. So it's very interesting to see that that's something that's just not being discussed, that it's got so little default memory. especially for being a download-specific console. And the other thing that I'm not 100% sure on, because I don't know the OS terribly well, it's running off of Linux. And I'm not a Linux user. I know a little about Linux, but not enough to get by. What I saw on the Indiegogo campaign was that being Linux, any Linux-compatible PC game should be able to fit or play on the console, provided the rest of the specs match up. So I'm really curious as to that as well, because that would open up some Steam possibilities. But again, with that little built-in memory, like that's especially a lot of newer games, that's not gonna fit a lot. So you will have to spend money to upgrade for external storage in some way, shape, or form. And I'm curious as to how it interacts with the external hard drive. Like, is that going to impact its performance capabilities for whatever games are applicable? It's a very, very interesting thing. And being Linux based, I'm not sure how closed off they can make the ecosystem versus how open it's going to be. Because that one of the things, the only console I know to compare this to, just off of, next to no knowledge consumer experience, is the Ouya. A digital-only console, kind of open-ended, meant to be friendly for developers. Not really any specs of what like major third-party developers are backing it. That's really the closest thing I've got to it, and the Ouya was not well received. That's putting it very, very mildly. The Ouya crashed and burned, and I just don't see what makes this different. I mean, again, I've said I don't 100% get any of the tech specs to it. If someone out there can provide some concrete comparisons between the two, and like link to like some recorded benchmarks of how the hardware compares to other similar pieces of hardware, that would be incredibly helpful to try to figure out, like, is that perception accurate or not? Because that's what I see, and it really makes me wonder how they got that much money and why people are so willing to throw their money at this, because the campaign itself is not cheap. The consoles themselves are running $275 to $300, depending on what configuration you get. The cheaper ones don't come with a controller, which is a thing. But it does say that it will support keyboard and mouse and Bluetooth controllers, so you could use your own controllers if you really want to, if you have controllers that are compatible. But for that amount of money, it seems very expensive for very little information. Now, if on the Indiegogo they came out and said, we're gonna have Capcom, Konami, we're gonna have like CD Projekt Red, we're gonna have Rockstar, we're gonna have like these larger third-party developers that do games in multiple ecosystems, PC, console, mobile, whatever, say, yeah, we're going to do something for this because, it's easy to develop for, and, it's going to be easy to port some of these games to have a reason to aim for it more than just the Atari nostalgia of it, because a lot of what's going to be bundled in is a lot of classic Atari games. But they talk about how it's going to be able to play new and retro titles. It's the new titles that I've seen little to no information of. So that would be a big selling point to me, really, is being able to say, okay, what is going to be playable? And what is going to be... where is the support coming from? If the support's coming only from indie developers, then there's a good chance that this could be the Ouya 2. But if it's coming from indie developers that have done on multiple platforms, it could be, you know, all of the best parts of like the indie scene on PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and the Nintendo eShop. You could get like the best parts of those. But I don't know. There doesn't seem to be that much information on it, and it's concerning. But there's just a lot to this whole campaign that seems odd. And one thing I'm going to say is there are a lot of people that talk about that, you know, it's on Indiegogo rather than Kickstarter, so that's kind of a detracting factor. I don't feel that that's necessarily the case, mostly because I did support a very large game on Indiegogo, Indivisible. They went with Indiegogo rather than Kickstarter for several reasons, but one of the big things that people say about Indiegogo is you don't have to have a working prototype in order to crowdfund on Indiegogo, whereas you have to on Kickstarter, which provides that there's a little bit more of a safety net that you're going to get something similar as to what was pitched. Whereas Indiegogo, it's you can pitch something and then get something completely different. Like you could say, I'm gonna back, you know, Coke and get Pepsi, or vice versa. And Indiegogo, there's not really much that can be done about it. I don't feel that that's necessarily the case. I think it's not doing this particular project any favors not having a working prototype, but I don't think the location of the crowdfunding project is necessarily a deterrent. But I also could be wrong about that. I don't know. But just looking at some of the Indiegogo projects that I've funded and been interested in versus the Kickstarter projects, I really think regardless of what platform this was on, a working prototype would have been far more impressive, and it would have alleviated a lot of fears as to what this product is actually trying to be. I know there's some video of it, but I don't know if that's the actual working prototype or if that's just a skin. There's a lot of misdirection, I guess is a good word. There's not a lot of confirmed information as to the product. We've got the tech specs of what they're proposing, but not, we built this and we want to just build more and give them to people for an exorbitant amount of money. And that's the other thing about it that kind of concerns me, is the cost of it is, like I said, $275, $300. It's a lot of money. And given that you can get a current gen console for the same price, it registers to me it's a huge gamble. Like, I can spend $300 on this product that's not out yet, may not be out until next year, could be even longer than that, because I know crowdfunding any sort of project, there's a high likelihood that it will be delayed, and the more complex and I don't want to say overreaching, but the more we'll just leave it with complex the project is, the more apt the delays are going to be longer. So you could give this money to something and get a product later on and hope that it's okay and hope it has support from third parties plus first party development. Or you could spend money on an existing console, either the PS4 or the Xbox One, for, you know, a traditional console experience, going for a well-supported third-party and first-party development cycle. Or you could get a Switch and go for, you know, portability. And the Switch is also getting, you know, a great deal of third-party support, unlike the Wii U. So, like, it just seems really weird to me that so many people are banking on this. And I'm just curious as to why. Is it really just the nostalgia? Is it a collector approach that I'm not seeing, that's not really in my circle of game collection? Or is it people are legitimately hoping that this somehow shakes up the console industry to get things working differently. Because I know this generation, a lot of people were really unimpressed with this console generation, specifically Microsoft and Sony, because they released these consoles and then they released an update to these consoles as like a second revision, and it soured a lot of people on this console generation, because it seems like they could have waited and just released a much stronger product, or they could have just kept with this and then waited a little bit longer and gone for the PS5 and the Xbox 2 or whatever that they were going to name it. So I don't know if people are really hoping that this somehow shakes things up. I don't see how. But again, I'm not the tech oriented with this. I would really love someone out there to be able to show some information, or at least point me in the direction of where I can find information. But it really feels like I'm missing something on this. So I want to hear everyone else's opinions on this. Is this something like you are super interested in? Is it something you've backed? Is it something that still seems really fishy? Are you still really skeptical of it? Are you just going to wait and see if it gets any third-party support once it's released, or if it crashes and burns like the Ouya? Or is this going to be some sort of weird second coming for console gaming? I don't know. But I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on it, because I am so confused by this. So confused. So yeah, let me know your thoughts and opinions. I will follow up on this story whenever updates come out that seem relevant and applicable. So expect to hear a little bit more of this now that this is actually kind of getting off the ground. So yeah, till then, later everyone.